spotlight for everyone, and I'm just going to temporarily mute everyone. Okay, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We're going to be talking about the Nakbah today. The Nakbah, often translated as the catastrophe, is remembered on the 15th of May. Some people say that it started with the official birth of Israel in 1948. Some others argue that it began in the 1920s with the clearing of Palestinians from their homeland. But what is irrefutable is that the Nakbah continues to this day. The catastrophe never ended. We were reminded of this truth just this week with the targeted murder of the internationally renowned journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was deliberately shot to death by an Israeli soldier in broad daylight on the 11th of May. And by murdering a Christian American woman and then trying to obfuscate the truth and then attacking her funeral procession, Israel is proving by their own actions that they will target anyone who stands in their way of continuing and extending their occupation. Basically, the Nakbah has never ended. Today's discussion is part of MPAC UK's regular Live from Gaza series, where we speak to experts in and from Palestine to help you learn the bigger picture of what is actually happening to Palestinians. If you want to stay up to date with these events and so much more, follow MPAC UK across all of our social media channels and perhaps consider joining as a volunteer. I'll share the link shortly. We're now going to come to our first speaker. Yes, there we go. So our first speaker is Hassan Ben Imran. He is a Palestinian jurist and on the board of directors of Law for Palestine and a director of the International Clinic. He writes regularly on issues pertaining to Palestine, the Middle East, and international law, and has co-authored 2 books on Israeli discourse and Israel and Palestine. Today, he will help us understand how the catastrophe, the Nakbah, 70 years ago happened and how it continues to this day. Brother Hassan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you to the organizers for this event. And here I would like to agree with Ahmed on what he just said, that the Nakbah was not a one-time event, as we will discuss together and we can discuss further in the Q&A session. Basically, I'm sure that everyone is following the news, what's happening, what has happened with Shireen's murder, and what could have happened if Shireen was not murdered as well. Everything would continue to be the same. Occupation would still continue. The crimes that have been committed will still be committed anyways, without any attention from the media, without any attention from several bodies that commented on Shireen's murder. Here we would like just to discuss together to see the timeline, to see the evolution. How did this come to whatever it has come to, whatever the conclusion that we see now? How did we reach to this? Was it like some sort of a one-time event that shaped the whole thing, or it's much broader than that? Basically, with the First World War, and I'm sure that you heard about the commissions that were deployed to Palestine in 1919 and 1920 by several international bodies and by several states. The most famous of which is the King Crane Commission in 1919, when they were studying whether Palestine is suitable for such a project. I'm talking here about the Zionist project, about transferring and moving the Jewish population from Europe into the Middle East, Palestine in particular. The King Crane Commission came to Palestine and studied the situation, studied the culture, studied the population. They had communication with the consultative councils, with the leaders, with the politicians there. Then they came up with their own report where they said that Palestine is a perfect place for, I mean, like, it's such a great place to have something like this. However, this land is engaged in this exact language. This land is lived upon, is owned by different people. There are people with a high sense of culture. And here I'm quoting the commission itself. However, unfortunately, the government of Great Britain, once the First World War was over, they started discussing and studying the ability to basically move the Jewish population from from Europe into Palestine. This came in line with the agenda of the Zionist movement, with the Zionist Congress, with the Jewish Agency, who were trying so hard to try to convince the leadership there to create such a project. The problem with such a project at that time was that it was not about hosting refugees. It was not like what we see in Ukraine right now, millions of refugees flooding into other countries. It was a political project that involved removing the existing culture, that involved creating a structure that does not have any sort of capacity to involve the previous structure, a structure to replace another. It was not an attempt to merge within the existing structure. So it was not a movement of refugees. It was not a situation of refugees moving into another country. Rather, it was a colonial project to cancel one culture, remove one culture, one structure in favor of another. Then Palestinians, of course, they resisted this project because, again, and Ilan Pape documented in his studies, by the way, that I'm not here talking about the ethnic cleansing. I'm talking about how Palestinians in the beginning were providing food and were helping those who came as refugees from Europe. However, once they realized that this is not a situation of refugees, then Palestinians started to resist, started to reject the project that has been implemented against their wishes. And this has been documented in the British, the so-called White Paper in 1939, when Britain officially, that was an official paper, an obliging official paper from the government of Great Britain at that time, that in 10 years from 1939, the government of Great Britain would facilitate the establishment of a Palestinian state on the whole land of the Mandate of Palestine for everyone in Palestine, which meant everyone at that moment in Palestine. And the name was a Palestinian state. That was stated in the White Book. However, what happened in reality is that Britain did not fulfill and commit to its own promises and responsibilities as the mandate power, and decided to withdraw from Palestine. In the same time, the Zionist groups in Palestine, they were armed and they fought alongside the British Army in the Second World War. This is to say that these groups were trained by the British Army. They were armed by the British Army. On the other hand, Palestinians were disarmed in a very systematic strategy from the government of the Mandate of Palestine at that time. So when the 1947 war started, the Nakbah started in 1947, a year before the famous date for the establishment of Israel. Basically, Palestinians were literally, like, there was a very clear case of ethnic cleansing that involved several separate cases of genocides, like Deir Yassin, for example. It continued for 3 years, what was known by some people as the Nakbah. In my opinion, that was maybe historically it could be called as the Nakbah, but the Nakbah was not just simply that event, because whatever that we mentioned before was the preparation for this date. Whatever that happened after was to affirm, was to make sure that what happened then would still continue and would still stay in existence. Israel announced its establishment on the dead bodies of the Palestinians, and that was not a metaphor, that was literally the case. It was like the flag was waving in the villages where people were murdered, where houses were burned. There have been many studies that documented what happened. 60% of the Palestinian population were forced out of Palestine. Close to 500, a bit less, 500 cities and villages were partially or totally destroyed during this war. Or I'm not sure if we could even call it a war, because it was an extremely one-sided military operation. However, the conclusion of this is that Palestine was something like, if we can call it, unmade. There is a book with this title that explains the situation. Palestine was totally unmade in that event. Things continued to grow against the interest and against the wishes of the indigenous population, which is the Palestinians. Israel continued to expand in 1967. It continued to occupy more lands. It continued to plan more conquests. And you can see this in the memoirs of the leaders of the founding leaders of Israel, where they clearly stated in their memoirs what they did in 1948 without any sense of shame. Like, it is a very clear account of the crimes that they committed. And I'm referring to the memoirs of the well-known ones, like Ben Gurion, for example. Then they stated the wishes and the plans that they wanted to implement in the future. That we are living right now. That's why we say the Nakbah is still continuing, still in existence, because the Nakbah has not finished. Maybe the bloody, scary, shocking event that happened between 1947 to 1949 was kind of, Israel is trying to avoid that sort of scenario, considering that the waves of shock, but we still can see that something will slip here and there, like what happened in Gaza, when they tried to wipe out certain neighborhoods in Gaza. And as Benny Gantz said, we sent some parts of Gaza to the Middle Ages in full pride during his electoral campaign. I don't want to talk much about the historical evolution and the historical development of this, but I want to say I want to talk about the situation that we reached right now, what Palestinians are living as of the moment. Basically, what's happening in Palestine is a mixture of both apartheid and settler colonialism, which is much more grave in certain aspects than European settler colonialism in different parts of the world, like in Indonesia, in certain parts of Southeast Asia, in India and other places. Well, let's talk about the first aspect, apartheid. Lately, we heard about the reports of Human Rights Watch, of Amnesty International, talking about that Israel has crossed the threshold, crossed the line. There is a line that has been crossed, which made Israel appear as an apartheid regime. That was what Human Rights Watch said. That is what Amnesty International said. That is what many other organizations before them and after them mentioned, like Beit Salem, which is an Israeli human rights group. However, if we look at what is happening, Israel did not turn into an apartheid regime. Israel was created, was in full consciousness. It was planned, it was created to be an apartheid regime. The whole project, the foundations of the project, stands upon apartheid, or could be put within the frame of apartheid, connected and directly linked with the settler colonial agenda. Israel, in the beginning, if we look at the debates, again, if we want to refer to like, if we want to understand the Israeli perspective, it will be quite helpful to see their memoirs and to see their official documents that have been published and discussed, the proceedings of their conferences in the 1930s and 40s, where they clearly state whatever that they were doing later on. So basically, they wanted the land of Palestine, but there was one problem, that Palestinians exist on this land. So what to do? There had to be a process of unmaking of Palestine through forcing out the population of Palestine, and this happened in the late 40s, 1940s. Then some of these populations will survive, unfortunately to them. So what to do with the surviving population, the surviving Palestinians? There has to be another project of subjugation for these people, to make circumstances of living life conditions unbearable, where they would have to think of only one option: to leave, to find another place to survive. Because yes, you might not be killed, but you don't have the means to live. There is some, basically Palestinians were given the two choices of being dead or not living, but not being alive. That was not an option. Living life, as we understand it in different parts of the world, was not an option offered to Palestinians. I was talking to some of my colleagues lately after Shireen's murder, and they were telling me, like, you could see that they are very decidedly, clearly deciding to continue their struggle. However, they were at the same time thinking, like, how is this kind of, like, basically, what sort of life do the Israelis think that they would like to offer? Like, it was a moment of shock for everyone to understand what these guys, what are they thinking? Like, they have taken everything, so, and still they would need more. So what is it that they have in their mind? To wrap up, basically what we have in Palestine right now is a full-fledged apartheid regime We can talk about this later on in the Q&A if the time allows. And a settler colonial project, which is based on forcing out the Palestinians through all means at their disposal, be it killing, be it creating unbearable conditions of life, or for the surviving population, subjugate them, use them against their own interest, treat them as surviving creatures, the same way that you treat any creatures, unlegalized creatures around you. So basically, that is the vision that you can see in the discussions of the Israeli leaders that are made public. Many of them are made public. For now, I will end, and perhaps I would like to listen to the other speakers, and we can discuss further in the Q&A.
Thank you, Brother Hassan, for giving the wider context, and which is always a starting point that we need in terms of the history of the Nakbah and how it's been progressing ever since. It has never ended. We are going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Sister Sijud Schneera. She is a journalist and activist who lives and works in Gaza, Palestine, and is part of the 16th October Media Group, which aims to give young Palestinians a voice through media. Today, she will help us understand how deeply the catastrophe, the Nakbah, has affected the lives of all Palestinians to the extent that it has ruined times of celebration like Eid, Christmas, Ramadan, Easter, and so on for all Palestinians. So, Sister Sijud, if you could please go ahead.
Yes. Actually, this is not new for the Palestinians because they have experienced many things like this since the 1948, since the occupation occupied Palestine. Talk about how Israel occupation destroyed and actually this is the first thing this is the first time, not the first time for Palestinians to experience such thing, because in the 2014 aggression, Palestine, the whole Palestine experienced a very brutal experience because it was the Israel occupation aggression. It was in Ramadan and in Eid time. So they have experienced such brutal incidents before. And for the 2021 happened this because Israel occupation repeated the same thing and destroyed Ramadan and Eid of the Palestinians. And this year happened actually the same, because of these incidents that happened, and the Palestinians here. This year we're very frightened that the Israel occupation will repeat the same as it is a brutal occupation. The meaning of marriage, the meaning of how to you just know how to break our happiness, how to destroy our happiness and our lives. So the thing happened with the holy month of Ramadan in Jerusalem. Israel occupation know that the Palestinians will celebrate this holy month and as any Muslim in the world. Since the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, Palestinians started gathering in Bab al-Amud area in occupied Jerusalem. And then once they gathered to celebrate and to welcome this month, Israel occupation enhanced their groups, enhanced their forces in the place. And this led to breaking out confrontations that extended to Bab al-Sahra. Actually, from the beginning till the end of Ramadan, the people to taste the happiness, the joy of this month, because all the time they just fight the Israel occupation. They try all the things they were doing is to how to protect and defend their sacred place. The violations that happened. One of the violations that the Israel occupation violated in that month is another one, which is an iron one on both sides of Bab al-Amud to prevent the Palestinians from sitting on the area, and this will hinder their entering entrance to the area and to prevent like them from celebrating Ramadan. However, this decision of the occupation came. However, the authority of the Israel occupation declared that it is not allowed to erect any checkpoint in this holy month. However, the opposite happened, and another violations that we know, they opened fire on them. They threw tear gas canisters, and many were injured, and many of them were detained. And the violations reached its peak and the 15th of Ramadan, when Israel occupation raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque from the downtime and they started throwing rubber bullets and gas canister toward the worshippers as to prevent them from to prevent the Palestinian worshippers from coming and to pray to perform the prayer of Al-Fajr prayer, and to pave the way for the settlers to storm the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And because the Palestinians know that they are the landowners, and to the place, many confrontations happened in that day, and many people were detained. And that day, the largest number for a one day was 50. I mean, this is the largest number in one single day, and the 15th day of Ramadan. Actually, this was not the Christians people, the Palestinian Christians, were not spared from the Israel occupation violations, as them from entering to the church. They perform their punitive restrictions entry of a Christian pilgrimage and worshippers to the Church of the Holy Sculpture during the service of the Orthodox Easter. So the not only Muslims and Palestinian Muslims were targeted, but also the Christians. And for Eid, the same thing. Israeli occupation wanted to break the the happiness of the Palestinians, so they stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they started to detain the people, to destroy the happiness of their families. And many were detained before the Eid al-Fitr just went. I mean,
Sister Sijud, please continue.
Actually, yes. This is actually regarding the events that happened in Palestine and the during month, and how it affected the this holy month and the Eid al-Fitr and the we can say the religious festivals for the Christians people. Yes, that is. And it's it didn't stop. No, it is still Israel occupation violations against the Palestinians is still continuing. And to this day, the people in Jerusalem, the people of Bank, the people in Gaza are still suffering from this occupation. And actually, this is nothing new. It is from we can say before even the 1948. Until now, they are facing the Israel occupation violations and brutality and racism against them. They're still steadfast, and yes, they're facing them bravely because they know that they are the landowners. That's it. I hope I generalize, we can say that. I mean,
Shukran, Sister Sijud.
Yeah, that's it.
The connection broke at a couple of points. Would you be able to maybe repeat a point you said about how the Christians in Palestine are also being affected by the occupation?
violations against them or what? Because the internet here is not that stable, so I didn't hear the question clearly. So please, if you can repeat it again.
Yeah, I'll also write it in the chat. So please, could you repeat the part you said about the violations that Christians face in the occupation as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes. As a, like, sorry. As occupation issued an illegitimate decision to impose punitive restrictions on the entry of the Palestinian Christians and we can say Christian pilgrimages and worshippers to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre during the sacred service of Orthodox Easter. This is the point I talked about the Christians.
Thank you for clarifying. And you know, it's if you're not in the situation, it can be almost impossible to imagine what we take for granted outside of Palestine. And you know, I'm speaking to our UK audience. What we take for granted as a normal Ramadan, a normal Eid, we expect to be able to meet up with family and friends on Eid. We expect to be able to do our Eid prayers, to celebrate Eid together with our loved ones. We expect to be able to travel freely, to go shopping freely, to give gifts freely. And these simple actions are ruined, are destroyed deliberately, as Sister Sijud was saying, that, you know, the occupation forces, they deliberately seek to destroy happiness of the occupied, of the Palestinians. So, you know, thank you, Sister Sijud, for being patient through the bandwidth issues. And please do listen again if, you know, the listener didn't quite catch the first time round what Sister Sijud was trying to convey. I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, Sister Hania Al-Jamal. She is a teacher of global citizenship and government and the junior editor of the news website Days of Palestine, which has published stories for an international audience for 8 years. Today, she will help us understand how Israel conflates their political agenda of occupying Palestine with a false narrative of an inevitable religious war between Jews and Muslims by doing things like escalating violence before and in Ramadan and other holy times of the year. Sister Hania, please go ahead.
Thank you for having me. Everything started at the beginning of Ramadan, and usually it's not the first time that this happens. And a lot of news media outlets try to highlight the fact that this Ramadan is different in the way that it's the first time that Passover and Easter and Ramadan tend to, or happened, that they're coming at the same time. But one can just remember, go back to last year, almost the same timing, an onset of a similar set of events happened in Jerusalem at the same time. And the thing is, it's not religious at all, because if we remember, if we will go back in history, most of the people, most of the dwellers of the so-called Israel are not people that are joined by religious belief, but rather a nationalistic streak of what we call a Jewish nationalist movement, which is Zionism. It's never a matter of religion, because if you go down there, there is most of dwellers of the so-called Israel are people who are either atheists or non-believers or even Christians. It's not really related to their religious belief. And most of the groups that invaded Al-Aqsa during Ramadan and has been doing that this year and has been doing that years before are people who belong to ultra nationalistic groups that their sole aim is to take over more chunks, to gulp the Jerusalem fully, not just the west part of it, but also the east completely. So that's what's going on. It's not a matter of people praying in Al-Aqsa compound. It's not about in religious intolerance. It's rather that it's a flagrant attempt to changing the status quo in Jerusalem. It has happened before and it is happening at the moment. And a lot of times, Western media just tries to frame it, or even people who don't know better try to give the resounding question of, well, what about two-state solution? Well, whenever we think about the Palestinian territories that are split, the cut that Palestinians have, which is 48% of the land, Palestinians are not having that. Palestinians are not do not have autonomy in their own lands. They don't fully have the West Bank. Gaza is barely left alone, while it's got its sovereignty, but it's controlled from all exits, becoming an open air prison that nobody can go in or out unless the Israeli occupation government says so. We also have the West Bank has numerous. It has numerous, it has numerous settlements that are across, inside, infiltrating the West Bank. The West Bank has an apartheid wall, for God's sakes, and a good chunk of it takes over parts of the Palestinian land. You have people who go through tremendous routes that take millions of checkpoints to just get across across one side of the wall, the protective wall. So it obviously is not a state. So what's up next is that there are 4,000 housing unit project resident for settlements that is being signed off, or has been signed off a few weeks ago, to go through. We have lands that have been lived in for hundreds of years that are losing their houses. They're being kicked off of their own lands under pretext of not having permits, while those houses have been older than the so-called Israeli government. So it's not a matter of religion, and never was. Nobody is arguing who's most important. Is it Joseph or Muhammad, peace be upon him? It's not the issue. The issue is that there are people living in their land who are not being allowed to do so. Even people who live inside the so-called Israel, who are being able to live in their land, or a very small minority, they are being marginalized, and they are being treated with so much hatred. They are being denied their simple rights. They don't have full citizenship. The water supplies are not split equally. We're not talking here. I have a lot of my friend could not go to the West Bank to get treated from cancer. It's not a religious issue. It's not. It's just that Palestinians are being seen as less. And yes, there are documentations where that exact statement being said. We are seen as collateral damage. We're seeing as this thing that stands in the way, and they will not stop until every little piece of land is taken over. And that's what this is. And the difference between what made it different when it was about Al-Aqsa compound is that it's not only a piece of land that people have lived on and created bond to it. It's also something that they believe in spiritually that just crosses way more lines than one could count. You have a place that is grant to Palestinians through the grant to Palestinians after they own the whole land, just giving them 48% of it, but you're not even giving them that. And that's not it. You're not giving them freedom of expression. You're not giving them freedom of praying, or practicing the religion that they believe in. You have people, worshipers, videos of people, children, old people being beat and hound down by batons, by grenades, by rubber, by metal coated rubber bullet, by rubber coated metal bullets that are being shot deliberately to the head and to very vulnerable parts of the body. You have people who are being shot in their eye while they're just praying. It's not a religious issue. Anyone can see it for what it is. This is just extreme racism. This is just people who are denied the right to live. They're denied the most menial parts of existing. You don't have, it's not complex issues. It's not religious issues, not a 100 years old issue only. Today marks the memory of the war that happened in Gaza. The war happened in Gaza under similar events. There were people living in Sheikh Jarrah. There were neighborhoods that are being, kicked out of their houses for someone else to live in there. And that's the issue. It's occupation. It's colonialism. It's apartheid. It's that. And no matter what someone else just talks about it, they're like, well, what about Palestinians? What do you not accept them? Well, they're not accepting us in our own land. This is what it is. And it's continuous. It's unending. And no matter if someone stands up and says the truth, they're being hurt or shot. And whenever someone resists or attempts to resist or does anything, just say stop to put on the brakes on what's happening, they're being hurt, not just them, but their families and their whole town. This is what's happening in Jenin. What's happening in Jenin is just a collective punishment for the attempts of individuals to actually resist. And it makes no sense. It's ridiculous. If you're hurting someone, if you're hurting them, you're making their lives impossible. They're gonna fight back. And you can't cry wolf when that happens. But the issue is that nobody really wants to really hear the real story. Everyone's just putting agendas over agendas. Like when Shirin Bakla was murdered, was assassinated, shot under her ear while she was wearing protective gear. It's obviously not something, it's not beginner's luck. It's not an accident. It's not conveniently an accident to kill someone with an explosive bullet that smashed her head, made her skull, her head into mush. Was not an accident. It was not an accident. It was just a deliberate murder, assassination, just calling it for what it is. And then Western media just dared to make it seem like an accident or like something that was not clear. Or maybe she was hit by friendly fires. And then until her actual funeral, they didn't even allow her to have a peaceful send-off. And then someone else just says, well, what do you want to say here? You have a coffin, you have someone dead, you have an armed group of people trying to just respect the memory of someone who died doing something they believed in, and then someone else beating them, being weaponized and hurting them extensively. And then you say, oh, this is what it is. This is living in Palestine. There's never an end to this. No matter how we compromise, no matter what we adjust to, it's just not ending. And this is what it is. There's nothing more than that. Thank you. I think I covered. Yeah.
No, thank you, Sister Hania. I mean, just laying it out very plainly, what is happening is a brutal occupation. And any suggestion that such brutality is justified is just an excuse for the occupier. Any trying to reframe this brutal occupation as anything other than a brutal occupation only allows Israel to continue their brutality, only seeks to legitimize it, and you are therefore justifying and condoning such behavior, such as the war crime. It's a war crime, targeting a journalist, deliberately targeting a journalist who is clearly, wearing press uniform, wearing protective gear, and so on. We're reaching the end of the event. I'm going to pull up our next speaker. Our next speaker is Brother Raza Kazim. He is a volunteer at Islamic Human Rights Commission, IHRC, where he has been involved in organizing conferences, seminars, and demonstrations around the issue of Palestine, such as the Genocide Memorial Day Project, which is commemorated in the third week of January on the anniversary of Operation Cast Lead, a conference titled Against Zionism, Jewish Perspectives, and the Quds Day Rally, which happens in Ramadan, which is a demonstration with a focus on Palestine. So he will help round off today's discussion with a reminder on why it's important for UK groups with all of our different focuses to work together when it comes to achieving a free Palestine. Brother Raza, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for asking me to speak, and it was really good to hear all the speakers from Palestine and what they had to say. And it's clear from what the speakers actually said that what happened to Shireen is nothing new. It's clear that the catastrophe that is being commemorated continues, and it is continuing in various forms. The assassination of Shireen and things of this ilk happen, whether they are on camera, whether they are off camera. It is continuing. What is being presented, and I think what has been intimated, is this idea that somehow this is seen as something new, something that has happened at this particular time, and it wasn't that a bad event. It's almost as if it's an isolated incident in some of the way that this news media and some of the people in Western capitals and so on are actually trying to project in the way that these things sometimes happen. And we need to understand that this is something ongoing, and I think people, the speakers have clearly outlined how it's something that is very much part and parcel of what is continuing to happen. It's nothing new, and so on. And I think one of the roles, if we look at it from a UK perspective, is this thought that goes into trying to silence what is going to be done here and what is actually going to be said here. In that context, there's a famous footballer who tweets out, and he tweeted out on this, on the assassination of Shireen by the IDF, and he didn't even identify who it was that had actually done it. And despite not identifying, he was asked to stay off this topic and not actually opine anything whatsoever, and not say anything whatsoever. And he said, well, it is awful. Why shouldn't I say that it is awful that this has happened? And it's again an attempt by the forces of Zionism, who want to protect that settler colonial ideology from being in any kind of negativity being pushed out around it by whoever, if there is anyone famous. And this is something that goes further, and we need to recognize, I mean, the Islamic Human Rights Commission back in 2001, when we went to the Durban Conference on Racism, and actually identified with the Jewish groups and so on, that we need to work together and stand up against this and identify Zionism as a racist ideology, that Zionism is racism. And this was affirmed at the Durban Conference in 2001. And as a result, the American and the Israeli delegate, Colin Powell, and I don't remember the Israeli delegate, actually walked out of that particular conference. And it has been really good to see that all of these human rights groups have actually come out and identified this as something that is the whole philosophy and the apartheid that is being recognized in terms of what it is and how it has targeted and people from Palestine, the indigenous people of Palestine, as a result of the ideology of Zionism. And we need to understand that there is no space in the political landscape of the world for apartheid to exist. It needs to be dismantled, ideally peacefully, or in the words of Malcolm X, by any means necessary, to make sure that this is something that is got rid of. To come back to the UK and in this idea that Brother Ahmed actually mentioned about making sure that we have a focus on unity within the Muslim community, from different groups from within the Muslim community, and also from outside of the Muslim community. So as you mentioned, was the idea of against Zionism, Jewish perspectives. We've taken this idea and we've been working on this, this idea of trying to further this agenda of making sure that we have something that provides an alternative for people who sometimes get targeted because they're saying being anti-Israel, because they're being against the philosophy of Zionism and being projecting anti-Zionism, they're being targeted as anti-Semitic within the UK and other places. And in order to fend themselves off, sometimes this idea of interfaith actually comes along. And interfaith within the UK has actually been used as a tool for promoting Zionism within the UK. Now, what we've done is launched an initiative last Sunday called the Convivencia Alliance, where we had speakers from Palestine, where we had speakers from the UK supporting this idea that where Jews, Muslims, Christians, people of faith and no faith will actually work together to provide a system whereby we're going to talk about the issue of Palestine, the interfaith and people of no faith can actually work together, and people can be invited to speak and be speakers where they're coming from a perspective of being pro-Palestinian, against apartheid Israel, against apartheid of Zionism, settler colonialism that is being projected, so that this idea of being classified as anti-Semitic, which is weaponized to actually stop any criticism of Israel, can be challenged by providing this alternative structure to some of the networks that are out there. So I think it would be really good for everyone to be able to work together from across different groups, different ideologies, different kind of perspectives, as long as we are looking at making sure that this idea of having peace is fundamentally underpinned by the concept of justice and working towards justice and so on. I know that we're very short of time, so I'm going to stop there, and I hope that's been of some use. Thank you.
Shukran, Brother Raza. And just before we wrap up, I just want to leave the audience with something to reflect on. We have seen, through our speakers relating their experiences, we also have the historical record and so on. We've seen 74 years of the Nakbah. Do we want to see 74 more years of this catastrophe continuing? We've also seen how the Zionist occupation of Palestine is a political, ultra-nationalist project. So therefore, is criticizing the occupation and the behavior of the state of Israel, can it be said to be anti-Semitic? No. So if we want to if we want to support the state of Palestine, the people of Palestine, it is not anti-Semitic. It is only the right thing to do, because the 74 years that have passed, they have been terrible years. They have been unjustifiable. And therefore, we have to work together to solve the catastrophe for once and for all, and to do it in a way that achieves long-lasting peace. That is through tackling Zionists in power, because that is how they retain the power and the control that they have over the situation, whether it's in the UK through political support, through military support, through economic support, and so on, or on the ground in Palestine. So before we move on to the Q&A, we have a question that I'd like to put forward to the panel. Let me just sort out the spotlighting. Let's see. So if I could ask the speakers to turn their cameras back on. Okay, and I'm going to, Brother Hassan, if you could turn your camera on.
I am trying, but I think you have to click on something for me to be able to.
Oh, sorry. I'm still learning how to use Zoom. Let's see. All right, excellent. So for our Palestinian speakers, so we've had one question. How do Palestinians want to see the Nakbah ending? We are often told that if Israeli defenses didn't suppress Palestine, then Palestinians would destroy Israel. So, you know, how should this story end? This 70-year-long story of the catastrophe, how do the Palestinians want to see it ending? Who would like to go first?
If Hani and Sujud would like to start, they may. Otherwise, I can start.
Okay, Hassan, if you want to start then, please.
So basically, the question is about what do Palestinians want, and do they want simply to destroy Israel and build something else? First of all, as a Palestinian, I am a Palestinian myself, born in Palestine, in the West Bank. I find such a question quite offensive, to be honest, not with the intention of I understand the question might not be intended with this intention, but whenever I'm on TV, whenever I'm speaking with any, especially from countries that are well known to support the policies of Israel, I get asked, so do you want to destroy Israel? So how is it fair? Like, can we just go to the Ukrainians right now and ask them, what is your intention when it comes to Russia? Do you want to destroy Russia? What are you trying to do? Palestinians are victims to what happened to them. Palestinians did not choose the Zionist project to be made in Palestine. Palestinians did not choose the Nakbah. Palestinians did not choose that Palestine will fall under the rule of the government of Great Britain. That was not by choice. And Palestinians did not choose that the British government of that time did not fulfill its promises. And the documented promises, I just mentioned some of them, they're legally binding promises by the government of Great Britain. That was not the choice of the Palestinians. That was not the choice of Palestinians to live under an apartheid regime, to have a settler colonial project. Asking this question to them, I understand this might not be with that intention, but in many cases it is done with an intention to suppress the victim. Basically, when you have someone locked in as an innocent prisoner, you go to any jail, someone somehow ended up to be in jail behind bars, and you ask them, what do you think? What are you going to do to your prisoners once you go out? This is a question that is asked in several cases to keep that man or that woman behind bars. We have to be aware of this. That's something that I wanted to mention before I go to the second point of answering what I personally believe. I am in no place to speak of any Palestinian or to represent Palestinians, to represent people who are entitled to have their opinion and their voice here. I personally believe that right now we can go back to the original Palestinian demand from the very beginning. Palestinians in the very, very beginning, in 1930s, in 1940s, they were not asking to throw anyone into the sea. They were not asking to create another refugee crisis. They were not asking for anything. Palestinians were simply asking to have their own state. And when I say their own state, they have their own state that they were promised by governments that had no right to promise them in the first place, but they put themselves in charge and they promised them to give their own state. A state for everyone on Palestine, a state for everyone existing. This apartheid regime is illegal. This settler colonial project is criminal. It's quite inhumane. Just imagine it anywhere else in the world. Unfortunately, it got normalized in Palestine, so people got used to hearing that, okay, Palestinians want this, Palestinians want that. Just imagine this happening anywhere. Like, let's imagine that this happened in Central Europe, in Switzerland, in North America. Just imagine this. All Palestinians want is to have their own state, a state of their own. I personally believe that the only solution would be to go back to the original Palestinian demand, a state for all its citizens, a state for everyone on this land. This is my own personal opinion, but I do have to emphasize that sometimes this question is posed with a certain intention to keep the prisoner behind the bars. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassan. And it is true when the question is posed in such a way, it does usually come from, it might be ignorance rather than bias in terms of the usual media narrative, especially if it's from a media outlet that is pro-Israel. They may be deliberately framing the Palestinians as inherently violent. I would like to pose the same question to Sister Sijud and Hania. How do Palestinians want to see the Nakbah ending? What does the end of this catastrophe look like? Who would like to go next?
Again, as what Hassan has said, a good place to start is sovereignty. You've promised Palestinians a Palestinian state, they should get that, like at least as a good stepping stone start, because Palestinians, and I can't emphasize this enough, live in Palestine like third degree or fourth degree citizens who we're like unwanted rodents in our own hometown, and for a lack of a better metaphor, that's it. Just at least people should have their own sovereignty, and that's the exact question, the exact issue that is happening in the Al-Aqsa compound. It's a part of the land that is needed for the Palestinian state to exist. But yeah, but I think even asking for that is not something that would happen very easily, because they have an uncooperative and unwilling occupier who's not going to let that happen. So the real thing that Palestinians want, the real thing, is to go back to their homes, to go back from where they came. It's not a big ask. So yeah, that is what I believe.
And Sister Sijud, is there anything you would like to add? How do Palestinians want to see the Nakbah ending? What would the end of the catastrophe look like?
Okay, actually, as a Palestinian, I want to say that the Nakbah won't end as long as the Israeli occupation is still occupying Palestine, and the six constants the Palestinians are deeply believing of these constants. These constants, I mean, the Palestinians were not fulfilled. I mean, the Nakba won't be. Can I say that the Nakba ended or will end? Because the six constants are an integral part of the Palestinian issues and from the Palestinians, because about the refugees, about the the prisoners, about the this is an integral part of the Palestinian cause. And actually Nakba, because I mean the Nakba has caused huge destructions in the Palestinians' lives. So I don't know how it will end, but we believe that it will end by the Almighty for power, inshallah. But actually, even if it had ended, it we can say it has we can say a huge destruction in the Palestinians' lives. You know, in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank and Jerusalem, they experienced a lot. They experienced brutality and racism that nobody ever witnessed. And as my colleagues here said, that we did not choose the Nakba. We did not choose to be under the occupation. We did not choose to be besieged in the Gaza Strip, to be to to be separated from our families, like in the West Bank and Jerusalem. They are separated from their families, from their neighbors by the apartheid wall that we can say that aims to separate or we can say to weaken the relations between the Palestinians. So it's not such such a term that is Nakba or a catastrophe. And I want to just say that catastrophe, it is not a correct term to use to express the Nakba, because Nakba is more than this. It is not a normal thing, we can say a normal we can say the what is it?
It's not a natural
hurricanes,
disaster.
and these we call about
Not a natural disaster.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
yeah.
Yes, yes, because it is more than this. It destroyed the millions of Palestinians' lives. Yeah, and we can say that more than 1 million Palestinians were expelled, or we can say ethnically cleansed from Palestine during the Nakba. So we're talking about huge numbers. We're talking about the lives of many people. And however, they are the landowners, and all the people know this. And actually, I would like to say that the mainstream media has a great role in this. They covered what is going on the Palestinian land and the truth behind this struggle as it is, and the Palestinian land. I guess that wouldn't last till now, but because Israel occupation has powerful countries that we can say stand behind and support them. So yeah, it is it is the term. It is more than this. Many millions shall witness the end of Nakba and the end of the Israeli occupation, and to be able to visit and to travel to our occupied lands and to Jerusalem.
Shukran, Sister Sijud. And again, unfortunately, we had bandwidth issues, but one of the key points pointing out that the Nakba, it's a loose translation into English as the catastrophe, but the main thing to realize is that it's not a natural situation. It's not a natural disaster. It's wholly man-made, and its continuation is also a conscious man-made decision as well. We have come to the end in terms of time, but I would like to ask the speakers if there was anything else that any speaker would like to quickly add, just for a minute. If there's anything anyone would like to add, I'd like to give you the floor for a minute. Hassan or Hania or Sijud.
If I may just add something.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Actually, while following the discourse on the war in Ukraine, the media discourse about it, and what the politicians of each side mentioned, I can see that whatever that we used to hear when we studied international human rights law, for example, one of the founding principles was that a threat to human rights somewhere, a threat to justice somewhere, is a threat to justice everywhere. A violation of human rights, a war crime somewhere, a crime against humanity somewhere, will motivate such crimes somewhere else. This was one of the founding principles. And following the discourse in Ukraine, I can see that whenever something like this happens in Palestine, whenever such a grave crime happens in Palestine, that somehow, whether directly or indirectly, will motivate, will create justifications, not that they're necessary, but will somehow affect the commission of these crimes somewhere else. So when it comes to defending Palestine, yes, it is something that we do out of support for the principles, for the cause, for the human rights, but in the same time, it is something for the defense of humans somewhere else as well. Because the silence on such a crime in Palestine will motivate it somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassan. And Sister Hania, if you've got anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I want to add that just mid-March this year, there was a new project that aimed to internal displace 1,000 Palestinians from a land called Misafir Yat'a, who lived, it's just happening in broad daylight. And whenever, like, this just highlights how continuous Nakba is, and how people just, if you don't hear about it, it's not old news, it's not something, it's just happening as we speak. 1,000 people being displaced, the largest amount of displacement since Nakba. So it's happening now, and it's being signed off on. And just like, let that just sink in.
And Sister Sijud, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yes, I just want to say that today there's a campaign as today is the we can say the Palestinians commemorate the anniversary of the Nakba on the 15th of March each year. So I just want to tell you, if you are invited to or we can say kindly invited to participate in this campaign and hashtag because this means a lot, and this can make this hashtag be trended on the Twitter and make the whole world know about the Nakba, because many people in the world don't know what the Nakba is and what is the story or the real story of the Nakba. So I kindly invite you to participate in this campaign today, inshallah, at 9 p.m. Palestine time. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your support, and Sister Ahmed, for your your support of the Palestinian issue, and how you are really you're really the truth, the truly support of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, and this means a lot to us actually. So I really thank you for your efforts here and your endless efforts you do to this cause. Thank you so much for giving me to the second time this a chance. I really appreciate this.
Keep me in your dua, sister. That's all I can ask. Jazakallah khairan. Jazakumullah khairan to everyone for your time. And I'm going to